before we start the meeting, we have a moment of silence to think of those innocent victims of crimes and the men and women that protect us here and abroad. We'll follow that up by the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk Chapman, we have roll.
Commissioner Joel? Here. Commissioner Olson? Commissioner McDonald? Here. Commissioner Musa?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson? Here. Commissioner Udovich?
Present.
And Chair Commissioner Blast.
Here. Okay, at this time, we'll have citizens will be allowed to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. You have up to 5 minutes, and please address the board as a whole, not individually. Do you have anybody to speak on items not on the agenda?
We do have one item. Mr. Chair, I'm sure we have one person here
Do we have someone?
for an item that is not on the agenda.
Okay, please.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
she is, for some reason, we intimidate her as a board, but I am certain that she's going to do a very good job of relaying her point.
She will. So we'll have you say your name and your address, and then, please.
Loretta Bickford, 8367 Kelsey Whiteface Road, Kelsey, Minnesota. I'm not sure how to open this. I purchased a piece of property from the St. Louis County Land Department, and life happened. I am, it's actually in the foreclosure process, and I am wondering if, I understand that it is the board who decides to close, I don't even know if I'm using the right terminology, close those contracts when they're in default. So I was wondering, I'm working with banks and stuff, and selling property, trying to save, trying to get the money to repurchase this, but the land department has gone as far as they can go as far as giving me an extension, and I'm wondering if the board would be willing to give me like another 60 days. The reason being is, I don't know why the land sale that I've been doing, the lawyers have had the paperwork since June, and it's 6 months later and we're still dealing with it. So I do need an extension, is what I'm asking for, to try to get the land sale complete so I can pay off the land department and make the purchase of the property through the land department correct. Now, just, and you're wondering why? Why should I? Okay, why should you guys? You know, when I walked into that house, I saw in the future, the first thing that came to my mind was, you know, I thought I would try my hand at being a landlord. You know, and I thought, oh, this would be an easy thing. I can do this in time of life when I can do this. So we'll do, you know, possibly just do rentals. But then when I walked into that house, I was like, no, this home feels like, how do I even go about and say this? I want, my goal, I think, is to, I saw a foster home there. And I have been out in the community talking with people, just normal everyday people, and there's so many hurting people out there. And so when I felt that, I thought, you know, maybe foster care. So I contacted the foster care licensing department, and they, as soon as the home, I'm refinishing it, as soon as the home gets finished, they will come and license. And I was like, okay, well, what if I don't want to do a landlord, And what if the foster care, maybe that's not what I want to do. What else, what else? My heart is to be out in the community and help. And so then what I did is I contacted, I ran into actually, the daycare licensing lady up in the Iron Range, up in Virginia. And she was just talking about how that we are in such need for more daycare places. And I was like, okay, well, what do we need to do for construction for the licensing process of this? Well, what I learned was that there are different levels of of licensing, and I didn't realize that. So then I checked into Section 8. I have developed a very good relationship with the people at Section 8, and they are, so when they're working, they're really excited. Well, they tell me they're really excited, I don't know, about coming in, because I don't want to just be, I believe that even the homeless deserve a really, really decent place to live, not a shambled shack. And so with the Section 8 licensing, I then also realized that there's even a higher level of licensing, which is the state for group homes, nursing homes, all, the state inspections. And where I'm trying to go with this is, in the future, I hope I can continue this fun adventure I'm having in the future, but I am I'm actually building all of my homes that I'll be doing for the top level of licensing. But where I'm going in the end is, who am I? There's one more person out there who has a heart to help see the need. And would you please, I just need like another 60 days extension for the land department, so I can work with the bank to get that done. Oh, there's so much on this topic to talk about, but anyways, okay, I'll shut up.
No, thank you. And we'll have you please sign in and on the paper there. And then I'll have you,
No, if you already did it.
I already did.
you already did that, and then we'll have you talk to administration over here, maybe Deputy Administrator Fitzinger right here. Yeah, if you two want to talk a little bit about your situation with your land, we'll have you talk to them. And excuse me, I didn't in the beginning. I wanted to thank you for hosting this event, and Commissioner Jugovic, this is in his district, that I'd like him to introduce himself, and if there's anybody in the audience. Commissioner Jugovic.
Thank you, Chair Boyle. It's nice to be in Arrowhead, beautiful facility. I believe we're going to get a chance to take a look at the fire hall a little bit later. We're very proud of that. But we do have Steve Emerson here. He's a supervisor and assistant fire chief, and he would like to come and give us a welcome. So if you wouldn't mind coming up. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to Arrowhead Township. It's a big deal for us to have the county come and put on their meeting here. I just want to welcome you, and hopefully we didn't ice you out with all the ice we had here. We worked at it, but enjoy it, and thank you very much.
Thank you for hosting us. All right, is there any other citizens that would like to address the board on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, for those items listed on the board agenda or committee of the whole, citizens will be allowed to address the board at time motion is on the floor. Commissioners, we have the consent agenda in front of us.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Jules, seconded by Commissioner McDonald. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent moves.
Into the regular agenda. First up, we have Central Management Intergovernmental Committee, resolution opposing federal legislation impacting mining lease exploration within the Superior National Forest. Someone move it? No. Moved by McDonald, second by Jugovic. Administration, please.
Thank you, Chair Boyle and Commissioners. The action before the board is a resolution brought forward by Commissioner Nelson requesting that the board consider opposing federal legislation that would restrict the continued exploration and prospecting for materials within the Superior National Forest. The board letter and the supporting resolution of whereases do detail quite a history around the WCA Act and other related legislation and management plans. But the resolution very simply is with respect to proposed language in the United States House Omnibus Appropriation Bill that would ban mineral development within the forest and allow for the completion of an environmental study before any further activity can proceed. So the resolution resolved reads that the St. Louis County Board of Commissioners opposes the federal legislation and requests that the U.S. Congress refrain from any efforts to jeopardize the continued exploration and prospecting for minerals within the Superior National Forest. It is directed specifically to the language in the bill, and the resolve goes on to further state that the board, through this resolution, urges Congress and all pertinent federal agencies to allow prospective mining companies to proceed under the same federal laws, rules, and environmental process as prescribed under NEPA, which is the National Environment Policy Act. So again, a resolution authored by Commissioner Nelson requesting the language banning further exploration or suspending further exploration within the Superior National Forest is the source and gist of the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Next up, we'll have speakers on this. I know there's a few that are going to speak on the next subject. Go ahead. Tim Elbar, is this the subject you want to speak on? Tim?
I pass right now.
Okay. Tim passes.
Don't want to be outnumbered. I want to see who I'm up against.
Next up, I think we'll have Rick Staffman. Is this the subject you'd like to speak on?
Yes.
Please.
My name is Rich Staffman. My address is 1405 Lawrence Road in Cloquet, so I'm actually a Carter County resident, but I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Duluth chapter of the Isaac Walton League. We have about 135 members. Almost all of them are residents of St. Louis County, and virtually all of them do their outdoor recreation, at least some of it in St. Louis County. I just want to remind you that the majority of the people and your constituents in St. Louis County are concerned about copper nickel mining. Our chapter has been very involved in this. In fact, the Isaac Walton League were one of the early proponents that helped to get the Boundary Waters canoe area established. And I think we need to remember that the Boundary Waters is an international treasure, and it brings thousands of people to Minnesota every year, so it has an important value that way. And as our members have studied this issue more and more, we've come to be more and more concerned about the potential impacts from copper nickel mining, and also more and more concerned about whether or not the state's environmental review process, environmental regulations are able to actually control and mitigate the impacts from copper nickel mining. So I think the least we can do is provide good transparency, make sure all the information is on the table so that this environmental study that the Forest Service has done can be seen, given the light of day, so we can see what that has to say, and then we can make a decision based on all the information. This is too important a question to not make sure we have all the facts before we decide. I tried to think of an analogy for this. What I came up with is if you were taking your car to the garage to get it repaired, you would tell the mechanic there, say, don't bother plugging it into the computer and doing the diagnostic test. Just do the best you can with the information I give you. We wouldn't do that with our car when we go to the mechanic. We shouldn't do that with the Boundary Waters. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Loretta Pickford. Loretta was the first one. Okay. Is there any other speakers that want to address the board at this time on this? Please.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, my name is Frank Angaro. I'm Executive Director of Mining Minnesota, representing the non-ferrous industry in the state of Minnesota. Thank you for bringing this resolution forward, Commissioner Nelson and others, to get it to the final resolution on your agenda today. Heard a number of things that were discussed in your committee of the whole about this resolution. First of all, I think it's important to understand that this isn't about the study. If the feds want to do a study, if they did a study, whatever they choose to release, that's not of concern to industry. Our concern is the moratorium that would be placed on mineral development as a result of this language. Nothing in this resolution is inaccurate or misleading. Nothing in this resolution would jeopardize anything from the boundary waters. All it does is consistently say, let the process that exists work, let the mineral development continue to move forward. Why go back and put a moratorium and resegregate the minerals so that mineral development cannot happen? If you truly want to look beyond the studies that have already happened on the 6-year hard rock prospecting permit EIS, the other studies that are going to take place, you have no further to look than the next project that's coming forward, specific mine plan proposal. That is the only way you can determine impacts from mining. Everything else is just simply generic. Whatever the feds have or have not done up till now, from the standpoint of the industry, we don't care if it's released. Our big concern is the language at the federal level that would resegregate the minerals, put the moratorium back on mining, and stop mineral development in northeastern Minnesota, send a terrible message to the global investment community that Minnesota doesn't welcome that investment. I think that's the wrong approach. Again, other projects beyond Twin Metals are in the future, in the same watershed. Any generic study is duplicative at best. If you want a true public input and environmental impact analysis, let a specific project come forward, have the full-blown environmental review that has public participation. If anything, the federal language is what limits public participation. This resolution simply says, let the process work, don't put any impediments in the way, and let companies demonstrate whether or not they can meet the standards, and if so, let them move forward. If not, they won't. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this issue? Tim, do you want to go back up, or? Is Tim still here?
I'm here, I'm listening.
Okay. All right, anyone else to speak? Seeing none, then we'll open it up to commissioner comments. Commissioners. So Commissioner Housen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, the process that's currently is the process that this resolution supports. Until you have a specific project, until you have something that you can actually digest, why are we delaying and putting potentially other mining interests at risk? This is not just about PolyMet or about Twin Metals. It's about, in the past 6 months, I've had 3 different gold mining exploration companies in my office. We have platinum interests here in St. Louis County, cobalt interests here in St. Louis County. You know, recently I read a comment in the paper, which I love when they misquote me, but it said that I thought that copper nickel mining was a godsend. No, I don't think it's a godsend. I think God's been very gracious to northeastern Minnesota, and I think He's blessed us with a number of natural resources, which, quite frankly, I think we've done a pretty good job of taking care of. My question to Representative McCollum would be this. I would like to sit down with her and review the list of impaired waters within her district, and then review that same list of impaired waters in St. Louis County. Because I can tell you that in the Twin Cities Metro, they have a whole lot more impaired waters than we have up here. I look at this as a mining company making an investment in a state that has one of the most stringent environmental processes in the world. And they're willing to come here and make an investment. believing in the science that will drive this project. And I think we have to continue to believe in that science. The boundary waters from 1979 to 2000, or from 1979 to 1994, the federal government spent an awful lot of time looking at how they were going to have a process in place to ensure environmental integrity up here. That is what we have. Until you have a project, it's amazing to me, we're condemning a project that has not even been applied for at this point. So I stand here today opposing this federal legislation, and quite frankly, asking Representative McCollum to spend her time on the impaired waters within the 11-county metro, within her district, if she's that concerned about impaired waters. And then if you look around up here, quite frankly, myself and my children and grandchildren, we still swim and recreate on all of these lakes up here. And I'll be honest with you, my home is just a few miles south of active mines. So I feel good about where we're at. I think this resolution sends the right message, that the process is there. Let's follow the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Jewell.
So when Commissioner Nelson brought this, we basically agreed not to have these kind of resolutions again because they are divisive and force votes that are unnecessary because we have almost no power in them. But given that he wanted the debate is here. And those of us who disagree with him are willing and to say our piece as well. I've always disliked the idea that we say, well, the waters up here, we shouldn't check them out because they're bad down south, or they're bad out east, or they're bad wherever. The fact is, we should be talking about the boundary waters in northeastern Minnesota, not somehow blaming somebody else for something bad there. We know that there are issues in all over Minnesota for different reasons. Salt leaching into lakes in the Twin Cities is causing salty lakes that are very hard to clean up. We know that. That's because our road departments and many others over-salted. And we're trying to fix that up. St. Louis County actually has one of the best programs in the state for assuring we use less salt to protect our lakes and waters. Mr. Ongaro said that there wasn't public comment, but actually in this unreleased document, there are 2,900 people who commented publicly and 74,000 people who commented in writing. So there's a lot of comment that has not been released by the Trump administration. Now, I'm not surprised. They're not releasing a lot of things. So is it any surprise that they wouldn't release some information about science in northeastern Minnesota that would be inconvenient? You bet. They haven't released it. And they haven't released it when asked by either of our senators or multiple representatives, both here and in Minnesota and other places. So the fact is there's information there that they're choosing not to release. A piece of this is, and as Mr. Ongaro said, the other inconvenient thing is that there's a hold, there would be a hold on mining until we figured out the science. And as Commissioner Nelson so fondly likes to say, and actually authored a resolution in 2011, he wants to follow the science. He wants to follow the science. And I actually quoted this in a editorial yesterday in the Duluth News Tribune, that very resolution to follow the science. Well, they have science, but they're not releasing it. This resolution says don't release it. That's what this resolution says. It says that the language that's been added to the present bill should be accepted and that the science shouldn't be released. I think we all would agree that it's worth protecting northeastern Minnesota's lakes and waters. They're the cleanest in the state. There's no place else. Commissioner Nelson is right. All of those places down south have problems. There are a whole section of the state and farm country that is challenged because of what's been dumped into the water. We know this. It's not new information that there are places, but we have the clean water. It's really clean. So the last thing I'll say, and the reason I'll vote against this, is presently the state rules for sulfate in the water is 10 points per million. The Cowish and Birch Lake, immediately adjacent to the Twin Metals proposal, is at 1.5. So allowing us to go through the process and allowing us to bring it to the state standard allows the pollution in the Cowish and Birch Lake to increase by 650%. I, for one, am not willing to do that. And that's why I want the study. That's why I want this. This is the kind of thing where, yes, we want jobs in northeastern Minnesota and we want to support things, but there are some things that are not good for our communities. And polluting the lakes and rivers of northeastern Minnesota is just a place too far for me. So that's why I'll vote. I expect it to pass, as every one of these resolutions has passed, and I have always been voting against. I voted against the first one, where we voted for something before we knew the science. We said we want copper nickel mining before we had the science. So I'm not surprised that it'll pass, and not the least troubled by being one of the minority of folks who will vote no. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Jewell. Other commissioners? Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, it seems as though we want to rewrite history. I know exactly what the first resolution says. The first resolution says we support copper nickel mining when they have completed every environmental review and when they have passed every environmental review. That's what that language says. And I remember people voting against the language that said we will support the mine after it passes every environmental review. Commissioner, I'm sorry, if I attack back a little bit, I'm tired of the people in my district being attacked for doing the right thing. I'm just sick and tired of it. And the fact of the matter is, I've gone so far as telling the President of these United States that I'm sick and tired of the people in my district. Face to face, I might add. I'm tired of the people in my district being treated differently. The men and women that are here today represent families. They represent kids in our schools. They represent our economy. I didn't bring this forward for political reasons. I brought it forward because this has a direct impact on the taxpayers of St. Louis County. The monies derived, the royalties and ore taxes that we would get, not to mention the amount of property taxes we'd get from development of these mines, would be a tremendous relief to folks. And I would remind this board, property taxes are a huge burden on the people of this county. This is an opportunity to lessen that burden. But there are people that don't care about lessening that burden because it's other people's money. Let's go one step further, Commissioner Jewell, because I've kept my mouth shut on this for so long, but I can't do it anymore. You know, the WLSSD dumps 3 million gallons of leachate into Lake Superior every year. 3 million gallons of leachate with boron, photocyclates. It's all in there. You served on that city council that, quite frankly, seems to have arm's length oversight of the WLSSD. The fact of the matter is you cannot treat leachate through a municipal wastewater system. What they are doing is, the solution to pollution is dilution. They take it in, they dilute it, they dilute it, they dilute it, and then it meets the state and federal standards, and out into our wonderful Great Lake it goes. So if we're going to have this attack on Out County, everyone should expect that my attack on what the city of Duluth is doing today, not what they're going to do in the future, what they're doing today, what they've been doing for the last 15 years, is going to be a topic of discussion. They all want to act like they're so high and mighty, but when it comes to opening up and actually doing the right thing, the pocketbook stays shut. And it stayed shut for an awfully long time. Commissioner Jewell, I was the one that brought the 100,000 gallons of discharge of septic waste into Lake Superior every time there was a 1-inch rainfall. I was the one that brought that to the federal government because the MPCA wouldn't do anything because Duluth had the political power to keep the MPCA out of it. So, Commissioner, if we're going to talk about polluters, let's talk about the people you represent, and let's talk about what they're doing to my Great Lake. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So,
Mr. Jewell.
I'll just repeat, blaming others instead of talking about the problem is a common thread here. We're not talking about what Duluth did. We're talking about the lakes and streams and rivers and the effect of copper nickel mining. It's a great way to kind of twist and turn away from the problem. The problem is copper nickel mining and its impact on the lakes and streams and actually woodlands, et cetera, of northeastern Minnesota. The other piece is that I agree that taxes in St. Louis County are something that's an issue. And I will tell you that the Trump tax cut made it so FedEx is paying $0 into the federal treasury. $0. And my guess is Antofagasta is paying $0 into the treasury. And that's because we gave them a great big kickback. And who pays for that? All of you in the room, because we don't get the money that we need to do the things we have to do. It's not like we get to choose whether to protect kids. We have to do it, and the feds and the state tell us to do it. So there's no doubt in my mind that there are other issues. There's other pollution we should watch for. And I have been happy to be a loud proponent of holding companies and communities accountable when that's not taken care of. But we're talking about the boundary waters, we're talking about copper nickel mining, and we're talking about the science that relates to it, which right at the moment is hidden inside some treasure chest in the federal government, and they're refusing to release it. I'd say it's worth finding out what it is that's out there. So I'll oppose this resolution, as I said before.
Other commissioners? See none, I'm going to move this to the vote. Before, I just want to give my 2 cents. Commissioners, this is now my 6th year on this board, and it's more about this process that concerns me. I have not authored a resolution of support on my 6 years. That being said, I am 100% behind my commissioners that want to, on their own, work on a federal issue, state or federal, whether that's contacting other officials, going to press conferences, going to rallies, speaking. I have absolutely no problem for that. But bringing these resolutions to support where we have no teeth in the matter is frustrating for me. You know, we have our own issues in our county. You know, on top of it, foster kids, 700 plus kids out of home due to the meth, opiate, mental health issues. We got Director Foldesy in the back corner there. We got, our roads are in good shape now, but we got aging graders and plows that we got to work on. Those are the meat and potatoes that I want to work on in this county. So seeing that, you know, I want to move this forward. I will be opposing this due to the fact that it is a resolution of support and would like to move forward on issues that we can actually dig our teeth into in the future. So seeing none, we'll move this to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
Roll call, Mr. Chair.
Roll call. Clerk Chapman.
Commissioner Jewell,
No.
Commissioner McDonald,
Aye.
Commissioner Musaf,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Yukovich,
Yes.
Commissioner Boyle.
No. Okay, Commissioners, next up we have Environmental and Natural Resources Committee. Withdrawal of Cloquet Valley State Forest from the elk restoration study area. Moved by Commissioner Nelson. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Jukovich. Administrator Gray.
Thank you, Chair Boyle and Commissioners. Commissioner Nelson has brought forward a resolution requesting that the Fond du Lac Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa to withdraw one of their sites for potential elk restoration from consideration. That site specifically is the Cloquet Valley State Forest site in St. Louis County. The resolution goes into the background and the study and habitat study and survey that has been undertaken by the band as well as the University of Minnesota and DNR. And again, this resolution requests those entities withdraw the Cloquet Valley State Forest from consideration as a site for the restoration or introduction of elk in northeastern Minnesota.
Thank you, Administrator Gray. We'll open it up to comments from the public. Tim, do you want to speak first on this one?
My name is Timothy Alvar. I live at 2849 Lakewood Junction Road in the Keith's district. You all know me. Keith probably doesn't. I pay for taxes on 200 acres in the eastern part of the Cloquet Valley State Forest. I say I pay taxes, but I don't own it because county has eliminated my right to do that because of a survey going on right now, and that's been going on for 3 years for me now. And I find it ironic that these commissioners, they'll approve the pollution hazard of our watersheds, but yet they preach about the dangers of our elk herd. Now, come on. And also another thing I wanted to bring up, and I left messages on phones about the oligarchy starting in this county commissioner's office. how public opinion means nothing anymore to us. Public opinion is in a high percentage for approval of this, but yet the commissioners don't look at that. They look at one thing only. It's got the Fond du Lac stamp on it. Also, the sulfide mining has a Fond du Lac anti-stamp on it. That's another thing that the Fond du Lac ban is up against, which I'm up against too, because my land is on the Cloquet River, upper Cloquet River, which is now pristine, but with continued gold mining, sulfide mining, and all the other mining companies that was mentioned in this meeting, the upper Cloquet River will be in danger of this too. So there's all kinds of reasons I'm here today. I came here originally for the elk herd and how dangerous it is, which I believe it isn't. It's just another thing that you commissioners are against. Against public opinion, of course.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mike Skirt. Mike?
Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to tag team Fond du Lac's comments with my colleague.
Please.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Mike Schrag. I'm the wildlife biologist for the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa. I'm here with my colleague, Jill Jacoby, who is the food sovereignty coordinator for the band. We're here to offer some remarks on the proposed resolution to withdraw the Cloquet Valley State Forest from elk restoration study area. We would like to give some background on our elk project, explain why this project has been important to the Fond du Lac Band, and address the points raised in the resolution.
Good morning, Commissioners. Oh my gosh is the Ojibwe word for elk, and restoring an elk population to northeast Minnesota is important to the Fond du Lac Band for a number of reasons. Elk are a native species once abundant across most of Minnesota, but due to unregulated hunting and habitat loss have almost entirely been absent for 150 years. One of the thousands of elk that once roamed Minnesota and were hunted by the Ojibwe and other native people, only about 130 remain today in 3 small pockets in northwestern Minnesota. The Fond du Lac Band maintains treaty, hunting, fishing, and gathering rights across much of northeastern Minnesota under the Treaty of 1854, and the meaningful exercise of those rights includes protecting, enhancing, and restoring the region's natural resources. For the Fond du Lac Band members, returning elk is partly a food sovereignty issue. It's the right of peoples to a healthy and culturally appropriate food produced ecologically sound and sustainable methods, such as the sustainable harvest of wild animals like deer, moose, or perhaps someday elk. Returning elk to more of Minnesota means restoring a native species, something that many tribal as well as non-tribal people feel is our obligation, where and when we can accomplish this. The Ho-Chunk and the Ojibwe bands in Wisconsin have been active supporters of elk restoration in that state, and the Fond du Lac Band has done similar restoration work for many years, returning sturgeon to the upper St. Louis River. Lastly, returning elk is a means of helping the band prepare for pending climate change. Historically and today, wild elk live successfully in climates from Arkansas to Alberta, and they will adapt to future changes in our local forests and climates. In spite of our best efforts, some of our cold and snow-adapted species, such as moose, may not fare well. Miigwech.
In 2015, the Fond du Lac Band partnered with the University of Minnesota and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and applied to the state's Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund for funding to conduct a feasibility study for returning elk to northeast Minnesota. Our proposal was to assess levels of public support for the idea and to determine if suitable habitat, elk habitat, existed in northeast Minnesota. We focused on 3 areas for our study, centered on the Cloquet Valley State Forest, the Fond du Lac Reservation and the surrounding Fond du Lac State Forest, and the Nemadji State Forest. In 2016, we were awarded funding by the legislature and the governor to do our feasibility study, which was led by the university. We completed our research and issued our final reports this past August. Copies were shared with St. Louis County Lands and Minerals staff and with yourselves. As part of our research, the university mailed 1,500 surveys to randomly selected landowners living in or within 5 miles of our Cloquet Valley study area. Of the 841 landowners who responded, 82% expressed support for wild, free-ranging elk. In addition, we sent surveys to 1,000 residents of southern St. Louis County and another 1,000 surveys to residents of the Duluth metro area. Support from residents in southern St. Louis County for elk was 83% and 82% from the Duluth metro area. Our analysis of potential elk habitat, which borrowed heavily from existing elk range in Wisconsin and Michigan, shows all 3 of our study areas, including the Cloquet Valley State Forest, could support healthy numbers of elk someday. That would average about 1 elk per square mile. As the resolution before you says, there is no historical evidence for elk in the Cloquet Valley State Forest, although some authorities put the edge of the historic range for Minnesota elk only a few miles away in Carleton County and the southwest corner of St. Louis County. When the first white settlers arrived in northeast Minnesota, the Cloquet Valley State Forest was primarily moose and caribou range. Today, the Cloquet Valley is white-tailed deer and turkey range, with a few moose still hanging on. The advent of commercial logging after the 1850s created a younger forest and more suitable habitat for deer and more recently turkeys. Elk, unfortunately, never had the opportunity to take advantage of these changes, as elk, like buffalo, were rapidly exterminated from the state beginning in the 1800s. The best historical habitat for elk in Minnesota was on our prairies, where the first white explorers described herds of thousands. Today, however, most of our native prairie has been converted to towns and agriculture, leaving our state's forest lands as the last remaining potential habitat for elk. Elk are adaptable to a wide variety of habitats, and experience from other states show they do very well in landscapes with abundant young forests. Vehicle accidents and the risks of injury are also cited in the resolution as another reason to oppose elk. The likelihood for elk vehicle accidents and the risk of injury or damage is not greater or less than it is for our other large wildlife, such as deer or moose, both of which are already found on the Cloquet Valley Forest, and both of which many local residents would like to have more of. Based on experience from neighboring Midwestern states like Michigan and Wisconsin, elk densities will not reach nearly the same densities on the landscape as white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer will continue to be responsible for the vast majority of wildlife vehicle collisions in northeast Minnesota. Bovine tuberculosis and the risk to Minnesota's cattle industry are also cited as a concern. It's extremely unlikely elk would be responsible for bringing TB to the Cloquet Valley Forest someday, as a rigorous disease testing protocol would be part of any future elk movement. No elk would be accepted from a herd where TB is known to be circulating, and the standard protocol for all recent elk restorations in the United States includes a quarantine period and a test for TB before animals are moved or released. Elk that tested positive for TB are slaughtered. No other state involved in elk restoration work has introduced TB to a new area as a result of moving elk. Similar disease testing protocols would be part of any elk movement into northeast Minnesota. Elk have caused damage to agricultural producers in northwest Minnesota. Counties such as Kitson County, where agriculture is a dominant land use, are not good areas to establish an elk herd. By comparison, the landscape of the Cloquet Valley Forest is primarily forest and public land, where recreation and timber harvest are the dominant land uses, and where abundant stands of young aspen create ideal forage for elk. This is similar to the landscapes in Bayfield, Sawyer, and Ashland counties, where Wisconsin has had an elk herd now for almost 25 years with minimal agricultural conflicts. There are pockets of agriculture around the Cloquet Valley, but there is ample opportunity to manage elk away from these areas on surrounding public lands. While stored forage and fences may be a future issue from elk from time to time, our landscape is not dominated by agriculture as it is in northwest Minnesota. Lastly, Minnesota provides compensation to producers who suffer damage from elk and provides additional resources to help willing producers avoid future conflicts with elk or other wildlife. Chronic wasting disease is a real concern for this effort. Although elk appear to be less susceptible to the disease than deer, elk can get it, and it's always fatal if they do. There is as yet no reliable live animal test for the disease like there is with TB. The best practice currently available is to test enough dead deer and elk that wildlife managers can be confident the disease isn't present in a given area. In recent years, Missouri, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wisconsin have managed this risk and successfully restored their historic elk populations without spreading chronic wasting disease as a result. White-tailed deer provide the bulk of the wild game provided by Fond du Lac hunters. The risk of chronic wasting disease is not something tribal members take lightly, and it will be an important consideration as the Fond du Lac Band considers whether or not this idea should proceed, and if so, how. The Fond du Lac Band is still considering the results of this feasibility study and working through its own internal advisory processes before deciding whether or not to move forward with the idea. If the band elects to pursue this process and someday help establish an elk herd here and grow it large enough to allow a level of sustainable hunting, it won't be able to do this without support and cooperation from the non-tribal public and agencies such as the DNR and county land managers. If it moves forward, this project will require coordination among state, tribal, and local government agencies, and opportunities for the public to give input and help develop elk management guidelines would be part of the process. Many of the concerns raised in this resolution would be addressed as part of that public process. At this time, a resolution against elk is premature and goes against what solid majorities of landowners and residents in southern St. Louis County have told us about having elk someday in the Cloquet Valley. Commissioners are urged for now to defer taking action for or against elk, to talk further with their constituents about the idea, and learn more about what an attempted elk restoration in northeast Minnesota would mean. Allow us opportunity to hear and address concerns, such as the ones raised by this resolution, before reaching a decision whether or not to support elk in the Cloquet Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else that would like to speak on the issue? Please.
Commissioners, again, my name is Rich Staffen, and I'm here again representing the Duluth chapter of the Isaac Walton League on this elk issue. The Ikes were actually one of the groups that were responsible for establishing the elk refuge in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, way back in the 1930s. So we've been interested in elk for a long time, and our members are very supportive of continuing this investigation to determine whether or not it's feasible and prudent to release elk and reintroduce them here in northeastern Minnesota. I think all we have to do is look 100 miles east of here to find a very successful elk reintroduction project. And that project in Wisconsin really succeeded because there were multiple partners, including their county boards, who worked together to make that happen. Like here in Minnesota, that started with a university study back in 1993 to evaluate the potential for elk. And the first elk release there happened in 1995. They wore radio collars, as I assume the elk here would, to follow those animals, to identify where they were going, and also if they started to cause problems, to then relocate them or remove those animals from the population. So if conflicts develop, there is a way to deal with it. That herd has grown in this time period to about 200 animals, and it's had minimal problems, and it's becoming very popular with the public. In fact, it's been so popular in Wisconsin that they have now reintroduced elk to a second location down by Black River Falls, which is more agricultural than the Cloquet Valley. And the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, where they did this over in Wisconsin, is very similar in habitat to the Cloquet Valley State Forest. Over the course of this elk reintroduction in Wisconsin, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has spent $10 million in Wisconsin to help with the study and habitat management for that species. I would assume they might be willing to spend that amount of money here in Minnesota, so that's something to think about. Some farmers in Wisconsin now receive payments for growing forage on their lands to benefit elk. Habitat improvement projects have been done on their state and county and federal forest lands to benefit elk. Those habitat projects also would benefit deer. The same thing could happen here. And elk have become a significant draw for tourists in Wisconsin. Wisconsin now has an elk hunting season that draws thousands of applicants. Why should Minnesota miss out on the same types of opportunities? The concerns you've raised in your resolution about disease transmission, crop damage, and vehicle accidents, those are valid concerns. Those need to be looked at carefully and considered. The same concerns were raised in Wisconsin as well. And I would encourage you to Google elk in Wisconsin, and there you'll find their 2012 management plan that discusses all these different concerns as well as many others and the options that they looked at to deal with them. And I think you'll see that there are some good options to deal with these issues. It's not something that can't be handled, and it's worked well in Wisconsin. Your resolution really focuses on potential problems with elk reintroduction. It seems to ignore the possible benefits. Instead of backing away from the elk reintroduction study here in Minnesota, I would encourage you to lean into it. And instead of avoiding it, I would ask you or encourage you to write a letter to Fond du Lac, write a letter to the DNR, tell them of your concerns, tell them you want to be involved in making the management plan for elk in Minnesota. Make sure the concerns of local residents and farmers and landowners are considered. And remember that a large proportion of them right now already support elk reintroduction. So I hope that someday we can be like Wisconsin, and people in Minnesota can hear the amazing and wonderful and wild bugle of elk. In September, they will come here to visit elk and maybe see elk and maybe someday hunt elk. And last but not least, don't forget, one of the best tasting game animals you'll ever taste is a wild elk. Maybe we'll be able to get to do that someday in Minnesota, in this part of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak on the issue? In general public, anyone else? See none, we'll move this to the commissioners. Commissioner comments. Do you have anyone that would like to speak? Commissioner Jewell.
Well, you know, the fact that we have two controversial resolutions on our board agenda is just, you know, a difficult kind of a thing. I very much in similar response to the earlier one, look forward to finding out more about what Fond du Lac has done, the research. I look forward to the conversation. I think it's useful for us to bring more people to northeastern Minnesota, and the interest in elk, and all of my friends who hunt out west would be quite happy to hunt elk in Minnesota. So I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. I support Fond du Lac for moving forward on it, and I will vote no on this. The other thing is that this also kind of, you know, gets in the way of the science and makes a decision before we know what we're going to do. So needless to say, I'm not going to vote for something that I just talked about being a bad idea a second time in the same day. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Jewell. Other commissioners?
Thank you, Chair Boyle. Just clarification, I guess, on where my stance is on this, as it seems really good on the surface. Being a sportsman, coming late to the game with the elk study, I did do as much work as I could within the district talking to constituents about this, and it does really, the someday part of it is really good. And as I went out there talking to folks with the aspects of this being a supportive, easy issue, it kind of turned on me. And that's where I wanted to clarify for my stance, is that the folks I talked to in the district would like to see the kind of effort put into this project with some of the large game animals we already have in the district, and manage what we have and get those numbers to what they once were, and then move forward with an elk reintroduction or introduction. And that's just where I am explaining for my stance and where it came from. It was not a decision of me in the district moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioner comments? Seeing none, I will be abstaining from this due to my relationship, my working relationship with Fond du Lac. That being said, I ask Vice Chair Jugovic, who will be chair next year, that I would like to see forth those that would want to participate with administration and commissioners, a trip out to Clam Lake, which is about a 2-hour drive from here, to see what they have done as far as the elk population that started in 1995 with over 200 head over there. So I would like to have an educational journey into that next year. If we could do that, I think would be important. So that being said, we'll bring this to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
And I'll abstain. Thank you, Commissioners. I'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We'll take 5 minutes before committee of the whole. Commissioners.
Oh, that's how.
When I
All right, we'll get the committee of the whole meeting together here. Clerk Chapman, can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Jewell,
You're telling me that
Commissioner Olson,
expensive up in Canada.
Commissioner McDonald,
Here.
Commissioner Musa,
Here.
Commissioner Nelson. Here. Commissioner Yugovich.
Present.
And Chair Commissioner Boyle.
Here. And I forgot to say in the general meeting, Commissioner Olson's out with illness and could not make it today. Commissioners, we have the consent agenda in front of us.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Nelson.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jugovic. Commissioners, anything they need to be pulled or talked about? Seeing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Consent passes. Move right into the regular agenda. First up, we got Commissioner Jugovic with Public Works and Transportation.
Thank you, Chair Boyle. Today we have the state contract purchase of tandem axle diesel trucks, letter 19-507. And just for the record, Mr. Faldesi has promised me that all these trucks will be in the 7th district, so sorry, but not sorry. Right. That's what I thought. So it's a resolution to approve the purchase of 12 Mack Granite tandem axle diesel trucks, and I would move.
Second.
Second by Commissioner McDonald. Would you be so kind?
Thank you, Chair Jugovich and Commissioners. As noted, the resolution before the board is a request to approve the purchase of a dozen tandem axle diesel trucks. These are the Mack Granite trucks, which remain the core, the foundation of our fleet, and have been a great workhorse. This is reflective of our commitment and the board's commitment through the budget process as well to upgrading and improving and our fleet. This gives us a jump, and the timing is such that we're bringing this to the board at this moment so that we can have assured that these trucks, and these I should note are the chassis, not the whole works yet, that'll be the second phase, but that we can get a jump start and have these trucks available for our season next year. And we need this lead time. So we, both Jim and I are thankful for the board for this consideration. The total purchase price is approaching $1.6 million. We are encumbering proceeds that we will have available going forward. And I should note that there is, this includes an almost $100,000 price tag for sales tax, oddly enough, on this particular type of equipment that is so critical. And I believe that when we discuss our legislative priorities in an upcoming resolution, that this is one of the areas where we still hope to get relief from the legislature at some point in time, because that's almost half a truck on this purchase alone that is going towards sales tax. But having said that, again, the action before the board is to place this order against the next year's equipment budget and to ensure that these dozen trucks are available and on hand for services to our residents in the following winter season.
Okay, comments or questions? Commissioner Jewell.
So, Jim, maybe you can answer this. So we're replacing things that are 20 years old. What was the gas mileage of those, and what's the gas mileage of the present ones? What's the difference, and how much better are we doing?
They don't burn any gas.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner Jugovich, and Commissioners. Commissioner Jewell, as far as fuel mileage that we get out of the newer trucks versus the older ones, they do get better mileage. Off the top of my head, I don't know those numbers, but we can get those to you.
So, as I pointed out before, I don't want us to be known as a county that pollutes. So I would like us to be moving toward the most fuel-efficient vehicles possible, and those, whatever those are. So I don't know if it's in this example, but I will ask of every vehicle purchase we make. It would be great if you have answers ahead of time, because it's going to be important to me. But anyway, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. No. I'll wait for the information next time and we'll talk about it.
Okay, motion carries. The second thing on Public Works is a lease of a parcel adjacent to the Linden Grove Public Works Facility. It's a resolution to authorize the lease located adjacent to Linden Grove to the Minnesota DNR, and I would move.
Support.
Second by Commissioner Nelson. Is there, would you like to frame, or Jim, since you
Well,
got that?
thank you, Chair Jugovich and Commissioners. This is a legal compliance step. We have had a long-time lease, essentially an easement on DNR-managed land, state land, next to our Linden Grove site. This is merely to formalize the lease update and the extension of the easement. The annual lease payment is approximately $500, and this is just to get us into a fully executed lease. So we're bringing that to the board. The lease term is through December of 2022.
Comments or questions from any commissioners? Okay. That being said, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then last we have controlled access. It's a relocationist letter 19-509. It's a resolution to approve removal and relocation of existing legal access within the controlled access area along County State Aid Highway 4. I did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Faldesi last night about this, and it's kind of an interesting situation, if you would be so kind as to...
Yes, it is, Chair Jugovich. Commissioners.
I thought I moved it. I'll move it then.
I'll support it.
Okay. Would you be so kind as to frame it now?
As you noted, we do have a controlled access along this corridor that, in a technical sense or a real sense, limits the number of access points. The particular individual in question, Mr. and Ms. Stager, were looking to add access to land that they had acquired or inherited. To do so, they worked with our right-of-way folks and Vic Lund in Public Works, and they did reach out to another private party who had access control. That individual waived that right and transferred it essentially to the Stagers. So it requires formal board agreement, and I would note that before any work on a driveway or access is begun, of course, the new party, the Stagers, must apply for an entrance or driveway permit prior to any commencement of work. Again, this is consistent with our corridor plan to have a finite and limited number of ingress, egress, or access points, and to the credit of the private parties, as noted in Mr. Chesney's letter, they worked through this, and we helped facilitate that, and it was an example of good cooperation among neighbors.
Any comments or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. That's all for Public Works. Back to you, Chair Boyle.
Thank you, Commissioner Jugovich. Next up, we have Finance and Budget, Commissioner McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today we have before us a request to consider a tobacco license renewal for Keith and Lois Nelson from Vale Township, and I would move that.
Support.
Moved and supported. Turn it over to administration. Oh, Commissioner Nelson.
Mr. Chair, I will need to recluse myself from this vote. I do have a direct financial interest in this business.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. And yes, the action before the board is to request approval of a tobacco license renewal for an entity that is owned and operated by Commissioner Keith and Lois Nelson. It's at your convenience in Vale Township, and this convenience store, this is an annual ritual, and it's brought forward on the board just to afford Commissioner Nelson to recuse himself from the vote, given his financial interest in the and operational interest in at your convenience. So straightforward tobacco license renewal, just that Commissioner Nelson has an interest in the entity.
Commissioner comments?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Nelson.
Mr. Chair, I would like to point out to this board that we do sell all types of tobacco products, but we have not, do not, and will not sell any vaping devices. That is a business choice we've made, is to stay away from those because of the impacts on young. So you know that this license does not include vaping devices, not in our opinion anyhow.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move this to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion's passed. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
One recusal.
Oh, one, yes, one recuse.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. Next up, Central Management, Commissioner Musaf.
Thank you, Chair Boyle. One item on the agenda here today for Central Management being letter number 19-511. It's the 2020 proposed legislative priorities. I will move it if I have a second. Seconded by Commissioner. Administrator Gray, will you frame this for us?
Thank you, Chair Musaf and Commissioners. As is our annual ritual, if you will, we do examine, based on input from commissioners, from staff, from departments, proposed list of legislative priorities to focus on for the upcoming annual legislative session. Obviously, this session is a little bit different in that it starts a little bit later and is ostensibly focused on bonding only. But there are always other priorities and issues addressed. With the support of the chair and the maker, I would consider perhaps moving this to, without recommendation, to the 17th. We will be meeting with our legislative partners and representatives next week, and we'll look for their input and feedback too. But if there's support for these priorities, I think that we'll have a working document to share with them and can finalize the priorities as part of our budget discussion on December 17th.
Thank you. Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Chair Commissioner Musaf. I would like, and under the bonding piece, I've requested this before, and I think it's appropriate. We have A through G, and I would like to see a bullet point instead of A through G. I could make the argument that I certainly have a different list of priorities than an A through G would likely indicate to our legislators, and I would like, instead of that letter designation, just a simple bullet point allowing all of us to work with our area legislators on what we feel is the most important bonding request, and not having our thought process synopsized in this way. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that as a, if I need to, I'll move that as a amendment, or I would, I guess, look to see if there's any objections, and perhaps administration can just do that by next week.
Mr. Gray?
Chair Musaf, Commissioners, I think that's fine. The prioritization is always a difficult one, and when you have multiple asks, we're more interested in sharing what our needs and our needs are relative to projects. So I think we can certainly accommodate that without a formal board action. And I neglected to say that John is here, obviously, to help walk us through and afford the commissioners a chance to digest this a bit more as he talks through the background on each of these issues. We have tried to, even though there's a lot of items here, condense it as much as possible, but we have a lot on our plate, a lot that is going on, as always, at the legislature. So at this point, I would turn it over to John. I know there's at least one other commissioner comment before that, but then John will walk through. We'll make that point to not numerically or alphabetically detail the bonding requests if the board is okay with that, and I think they are.
Thank you, Administrator Gray. Do we want a couple more commissioner questions before we move forward here? Commissioner Jukovic?
Thank you, Chair. Just something I'd like, last year we brought it up to, and I know I think the board is all it's moving in the same direction as this. We believe the state and feds need to be more involved in broadband, but I think at the same time we hear a lot from our constituents that broadband is very important to them and they'd like to see it happen. So without a doubt, I'd like to have us have something on the list where it shows that we are in support of having state and federal agencies come through and help us out with broadband.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Boyle.
We'll let John go after this, but the one thing that's still glaring at me under Health and Human Services is the disaster that's unfolding with DHS and the possibility of counties and tribes throughout the state owing for what is truly the DH's mistakes. Are we, John, and I know we have that surplus going on, but is the Minnesota Counties Association taking this on, or should we include this on? Is that to capture some of that money that was lost, that it shouldn't fall on counties or tribes, but it should come from the state? That is the failure?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Boyle, if you look at your updated legislative priorities, the under Human Services Reforms, the second item, substance abuse treatment payments. I'm prepared to discuss a little bit of that today, give you a quick update. When I go through, is that okay, or I can do it now either way? Okay.
Anything further, Commissioner Boyle? Okay. Go ahead, John. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. You know, we had a board workshop about a month ago and covered the vast majority of these, so rather than be redundant and cover every one of them, unless you have a question, I'm just going to update you on changes that have occurred since the board workshop and update you on those. On that bonding list, the very last item, the NLX Grassy Point upgrade, learned yesterday that the House Transportation Finance Committee will be coming up for a field hearing in Duluth, probably at UMD on Wednesday, December 11th in the afternoon. The primary purpose, they want to hear, there's a couple bills related to NLX that they want to hear, but they also want to hear other regional transportation needs as well. I already talked to Jim about it. And so we'll have an opportunity to present testimony on not only NLX, but county road and bridge issues, et cetera. So that's a nice opportunity for us to be able to impress them on some of our needs up here. Moving down the list, I guess I'll go straight forward to the issue which
which Commissioner Boyle just referenced. As you know, about a week ago, we received this less than pleasant news from DHS that counties statewide owe $8.8 million just for one of these 3 programs that they miscalculated the numbers on. That was by far the biggest one, and that's the substance abuse treatment facility payments for the county share. What happened is that there is a limit. Federal Medicaid has a limit of 16 beds that you can claim these dollars for in a facility, and DHS allowed facilities that were in excess of 16 beds to get this reimbursement going back a number of years. And now they allegedly were notified in May by CMS that this overpayment occurred, which would have been nice if they had shared that information with their county partners, because the legislative session was still going on in May, and we could have dealt with this last May. But it took until, I guess, last week for them to formally send a letter to their county partners. And you've seen the list, the 87 counties, the breakdown, and St. Louis County certainly stands out. We're about 10% of the overall cost share to make up for this. The good news is they're not number 1 on a per capita basis. Itasca County actually has a higher per capita cost than St. Louis, so that's the only good news for us. Is I would have sworn, looking at these numbers, automatically St. Louis County clearly has the highest per capita cost. But I also have listed there that the county response and strategy, one of those first steps occurred yesterday in St. Paul. A group of us county lobbyists met with DHS, some of their staff, to start walking down the path of reform. And this was something that already had been arranged prior to this letter, us receiving this letter. DHS really didn't want to spend too much time talking about that yesterday. They wanted to talk about other efforts that they can work with the counties this coming session, which was all good and fine, but the 800-pound gorilla in the room continued to be that $8.8 million hit that counties are receiving, and we made it clear that, you know, we want to deal with that first before we deal with these other issues that they want to talk about, reform issues. And speaking of reform, you know, really what this whole issue flies in the face of is a major policy change that occurred at the legislature, technically in 1980. I did some digging and I found a legislative auditor's report from 1987, February 1987, called Financing County Human Services. And it was this report by the legislative auditor that kind of prompted the legislature to say, you know, we need to be doing things different. You know, the county property taxes in some area are getting, you know, way over what they should be on a per capita basis, especially. You know, where some areas of the state are really being penalized on the property tax because they have higher human service caseloads than other parts of the state. And interestingly enough, St. Louis County here was number 1 in the state. Just to give you an example of a per capita basis, human service costs statewide were $6.36 on $1,000 as assessed value then. St. Louis County was the highest in the state at $19.74. Carleton County was next at $13.67. Hennepin was down at $7.68. And so it gives you an idea that, you know, we really stood out substantially all on our own. And the next year, thankfully, because we had a tax committee chair from northeastern Minnesota by the name of Senator Doug Johnson, he took this report and put it into the tax bill, basically, and had the state take over the costs from the counties that we were paying for these income maintenance programs. That's medical assistance, that's the old AFDC program, which is now AMFIP, supplemental security income, general assistance, medical care, all of that. We used to pay a portion of that off the local property tax. He transitioned that off, but we did have to trade. We traded the equivalent of about $100 million of, at that time, it was called Homestead and Agricultural Credit Aid, which today we could call county program aid, okay? So that was a major trade we made. We gave up $100 million in state funding in exchange for them to take over those costs so that it didn't disproportionately impact people that lived in an area that didn't have the incomes or the property wealth to pay for that. The legislature said the state income tax and the state sales tax is a much fairer way to fund these rather than the local property tax. And fortunately, that lasted for over a decade. And then I found in 2003, during the Pawlenty years when we had major deficit budget, and our county program aid at that time, we remember we lost, 50% or more of our total county program aid. But not only did we lose county program aid during those difficult deficits, but they reinstated part of the income maintenance costs onto counties again as a way to help balance the budget. In 2003, the non-federal share of medical assistance costs for stays in excess of 90 days in the following situations occurred. 10% for individuals placed in intermediate care facilities for the mentally retarded of 7 beds or more. 20% for individuals placed in institutions of medical disease, IMDs, which is exactly what we just got hit with by the feds. That 20% of the non-federal share, that's what they nailed us on. If they had stuck to what they did in 1988, we wouldn't be paying that. And then the same thing for 20% for people under 65 on medical assistance in nursing homes. So as a budget balancing way, they got us back into the income maintenance game. We should have fought it harder, but we were already losing CPA on top of having to pay this. It was difficult times. And I guess maybe as a starting point, the counties need to go back to 1988 and remind the state that this huge policy change as far as the state-local fiscal relationship occurred. And that is the kind of reform I think AMC and MICA and our other groups should be fighting for at the state legislature rather than trying to piecemeal here and there. This was the significant change that occurred. Likewise, shortly thereafter, what did the legislature do? They did, the state took over our district court costs off the counties. Now, that wasn't a perfect takeover, but, overall, it has saved us money. That income maintenance takeover on medical assistance alone has saved us a lot more money, believe me, than the money we lost in HACA, the old HACA program at that time. So that is my advice at this time anyways, is that we need to remind the legislature of the major policy change that occurred in the late 80s and try to get back to that if we're going to really make long-term headway.
Perfect. Thank you for the information and update, John. Commissioner questions? Commissioner Boyle?
I just got a follow-up for you, John. We don't have so much time with our legislative grouping next week, but I think we got to keep the pedal to the metal on what's happening with DHS, and they're their bosses. And a perfect example of this meeting you just had is they don't want to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but they have to, and they continue to kick the can down the road. I'm just so frustrated with this organization that we have to let our legislative group know this so they can ask DHS the hard questions, because they're only going to do so much for us. So I'm looking at my other commissioners, but I think I'd like John to spend some time and really rail this home of how we're, as counties, getting shafted on this.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I gladly will, and I know that Linnea will be at the meeting as well.
Mr. Gray.
Just to build on that, we've heard loud and clear from commissioners about their concerns. One, about the 700,000. It's actually 850,000 with the 4E. I mean, this is, and we are the second largest impacted county in terms of gross dollars, in terms of expected payback as has been communicated to date. AMC and MICA, on behalf of counties and MICA organization members, are certainly taking this on. We will expand this county response and strategy to target in on the two things. One, the back payment request that's been made, and seek legislative support for mitigating that. And two, talk a little bit more about a broader conceptual model that we'd like the legislature to revisit, just as John described. So we'll expand that wording in here so it's a little more clear rather than at the high level. But you're right on, and I've received, and John has received great support from commissioners and outreach to individual legislators about our concerns, first and foremost of the back payment memo that was released last week or 10 days ago or so, and secondly, what might be a more long-term strategy and approach, and we'll try to have that ready for the discussion next week. So this is good feedback, and it's consistent with what we're hearing, and it's certainly on the radar screens, at least the back payment, very consistently across our member county organizations and with Director Murch. As John noted, we'll talk a bit more next week. We're still sorting through this and getting more facts and information from DHS. Not always easy. And we'll talk in the context of going forward budget impacts too, which we think are less than the retroactive payments. But nonetheless, we want to update the board of that. And Director Murch, as you know, just asked for a little more time to work through this. So we'll hear more about this issue, and we'll expand it on here. But just know that under the broad issue of substance abuse treatment programs and payments, we've got two issues. One is the timing of the reimbursement and under the Consolidated Chemical Dependency Treatment Program, and two is this issue that is first and on the forefront of everybody's minds right now, and we'll talk about both of those next week.
Thank you, Administrator Gray. Further questions and comments, commissioners? All right, so Administrator Gray, are we looking to move this without recommendation as a vote, or for?
Chair Musaf and commissioners, the thought was to move without recommendation to a date specific, December 17th. That affords us to continue to get input from commissioners and continue to refine this product. This will be the basis for our discussion with legislators at our legislative meeting next week, however. And so with their feedback and further commissioner input, then we'll finalize this on December 17th, if that's okay with the board. But this way we don't go into the legislative session with something that's essentially one and done, because I'm sure we'll get some feedback and thoughts from our legislators as well. And so we just wanted to afford them that opportunity too.
Thank you for the clarification. Commissioner Jewell.
I did have one question. John, can you get us the information about the item under Environment and Natural Resources, Lessard Sams, for the amount of LIOS tax base for St. Louis County?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Jewell, I want to warn everyone that, as I looked at this list and met with Kevin and Brian, it is a real exhaustive list for a short legislative session. It's primarily going to be bonding related. So that item is kind of wishful thinking. I think if we're really going to be able to make much headway in a short legislative session, but it's certainly something which I think in the future we're going to want to pursue aggressively, but in a short session. It's on here, I agree, but the more we've discussed it, it's probably going to be a heavy lift for a short session. But I will get those numbers, yes.
That'd be great. Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll move it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Back to you, Chair Boyle.
Thank you, Commissioner Musaf. Next up, Commissioner discussion items and reports. Commissioners. Commissioner McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for everybody's information, I did have a lengthy meeting with IT Commissioner couple weeks ago now. He just wanted to have everybody assured that he is still working on the items that were brought to his attention from St. Louis County at the meeting we had. The problem he is running into now, as we've mentioned here today many times, is DHS has other things on their plate, and now with things being set from that, he's confident that he can do some things to alleviate some of the issues that we've been running across in Health and Human Services and be able to rectify that. And then the other thing is, next week we'll be in the beautiful downtown Embarrass, and just for everybody's information, after the meeting, we will be taking a tour of Lampus Manufacturing and taking a look at their new building and progress, and meeting with their people and getting a bird's eye view of sauna stoves, among other stoves as well. So thank you for the information.
Thank you very much. I'm excited that'll be your last one. Only thing better than a finished stove. It's not a stove.
Bring your own cedar bowls.
There you go. There you go. Other commissioners. Commissioner Musa.
I guess just a quick holiday week. Everybody's thankful and have a great holiday, and our border battle, the Gophers visiting Wisconsin, just poking that your way, Commissioner Boyle. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment, and we will look forward to getting our axe back this weekend. Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to remind Commissioner Yugovich, I believe this is his. It's Plow Truck Driver Appreciation Day today.
It is. I appreciate all the plow truck drivers, that's for sure.
There you go. And it seems appropriate, given the fact that we've got 2 snowstorms headed our way, that we would be appreciating those plow truck drivers in your division, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Yugovich.
Will those new 12 trucks be in service tonight?
Other commissioners. See none, I just wanted to bring up the news that happened to end of last week of the awarding of over $5 million to Center City Housing for the Birchwood Apartments, which will be dedicated 30 units for those with mental illness, the hardest to house in St. Louis County. I point fingers at the state on a lot of things. Granted, DHS had nothing to do with this, but the state legislature did on a Republican-Democratic agreement 2 years ago on bonding. We've been so fortunate to not only get this, but then the $3.7 million on top of it for Regional Mental Health Crisis Center, where we're trying to capture the last 1.3. So we're just under $10 million of this important bonding money that was put forward 2 years ago. So we thank the nonprofits that have helped us out, Center City Housing, including, and they told us that it was due to our commitment with HRA allocations in the city of Duluth with theirs that put us over the very competitive hump of getting this award. So I thank my fellow commissioners for that. Seeing no other commissioners, again, echo Commissioner Musaf, have a good Thanksgiving. I'm going to be having rough grouse and venison backstraps tonight, so I'm more than excited. And everyone be safe on the roads. Move for adjournment. Moved by Jim, second by Commissioner Musaf. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.